Hey everybody, this is Robbie with Robbie's Reptiles. Today we're going to be going over what morph is your Crested Gecko. I have lots of people asking me, sending me pictures, hey, I just got this gecko from Petco, from PetSmart. Can you help me identify what morph it is? Well, today we're going to be going over all the most common morphs in the pet trade, specifically ones that you might find in a pet store. So more than likely, you're watching this video because you recently got your pet gecko from Petco, PetSmart, or maybe even a family-owned store in town. And you want to know what morph that Crested Gecko is. Well, today we're going to be helping. Now, more than likely, if you're getting a Crested Gecko from a pet store or a pet shop or anything of the like, it's most likely a wholesale Crested Gecko. Now, in the industry, there are breeders like me that focus on breeding very high-end stock to try and push the genetic limits of the species, try to make the newest combo and the best looking geckos we can. There's an entirely different strategy within the same breeding hobby, and that is to make as many geckos as possible to be able to supply pet stores like Petco and PetSmart, everything like that. Regardless of your opinions of that practice, that is how the cookie crumbles. So the breeders that are breeding things like that, they don't really care about specific things. Like me, I'm very picky and I don't breed anything that has pattern and spots. A wholesaler doesn't care because a gecko is to them, a $15 gecko that eventually, once it reaches shipping age, they're going to be shipping out. And they might be hatching out hundreds, if not thousands of geckos every single day. A lot of those breeders are working with fairly common morphs within the high-end breeding hobby. And I have some right here that are pretty decent examples of what you probably have from the pet store. So let's go ahead and look at them. So here is pretty much your bog standard Crested Gecko. Originally, we would just call this buckskin, but now we know that this is just a phantom that is brown. Phantom is a gene that reduces pattern all around, specifically on the dorsal and the laterals. But if there aren't enough genes underneath the phantom, then you get something like this. And for simplicity's sake, it is a patternless Crested Gecko. However, there might be little tiny amounts of other pattern on it or other signifiers, and we're going to be going over that too. So next up would be possibly if it has pinstripe. Now this is a Harlequin dashed pinstripe, which is another pretty common combination within the hobby. Now Harlequin is referring to the pattern on the side right there. That lateral patterning is called Harlequin. In this case, you might even consider this an extreme Harlequin. So this would be an extreme Harlequin with dashed pinstriping. And pinstripe has to do with the little white dashes that you see on her back. That is the pinstripe trait. In this case, this would be a very low expression pinstripe. That's why it's only dashed. Me personally, I prefer it when it's dashed. Other people may have something like this, where it's a much more full pinstripe. So you can see the difference in the pinstripe expression. Fully 100% pinstripe Crested Gecko, and then this being a dashed pinstripe Crested Gecko. So this has Harlequin, the lateral patterning is called Harlequin, and that little white dashes along the back or the dorsal is pinstriping. This is another one that you might possibly have gotten. This would be considered a Harlequin or even a flame full pinstripe. And she does have a red base, which is why I have her. I think that she's really beautiful and she is a fantastic breeder, but she has a lot of utility in this because this is a fairly common combination in the hobby. And I've also gotten a couple of wholesale Crested Geckos from AC Reptiles, about 110 so far, and a lot of them are like this. Pinstripe is a very easy trait to work into projects in order to get normal pet consumers to really like the gecko. It's visually striking, it's easy to make, and it can be relatively cheap for the end consumer. A pet owner isn't going to want to spend thousands of dollars on a Crested Gecko. A little baby like this, if I saw it in the store, I wouldn't be surprised if it was only $50. Here would be another example of a dashed pinstripe or partial pinstripe Harlequin, except this time she has white pattern rather than orange pattern. She has pretty good head structure too. She might be soft scale, I'm trying to prove it out this year, but this would be another example of pinstriping with some Harlequin, nothing crazy, nothing fancy. More than likely, you're probably gonna find something like this from a wholesaler. This right here is a brindle Crested Gecko. So a brindle can be classified by an absolute jumbled up mess of pattern on the side. That's pretty much how I look at it, but it's like extreme Harlequin, except much tighter and much more almost random and less uniform all along the laterals. So this would be a yellow-based quad stripe with pinning, like we talked about before. You can see on the dorsal, the pinstriping. And this stripe that goes along the lateral would be a quad stripe. And it's quad because it's like 1, 2, wait, stop moving. And so this would be considered a yellow quad stripe. We call it quad stripe because of the stripe right here, the 2 stripes along the dorsal, and then on the other side. It ends up looking like it has 4 different stripes. More than likely, another type that you might get at a pet store or from a wholesaler. Fun fact, yellow is actually a wild form of hypomelanism, which we found in the wild. Lots of crested geckos in the wild actually were able to evolve and survive over thousands of years as a hypo, which usually is not possible in nature. But with crested geckos being polymorphic, it's allowed for almost anything, it seems, to survive in the wild. Maybe that's because of their habitat, maybe that's because their color doesn't really matter when they're all up in the trees. Pretty much their only predator is other large geckos. But that's allowed for a large diversity of color and pattern to exist in the wild, which has actually made it tough for us breeders to really deduce what is the wild type. So we don't really have one. There's like 7 different types of geckos that can live in the wild. This right here is a tricolor crested gecko. Why is it called a tricolor? Well, because it has 3 main colors. What makes this a tricolor is the black base color, the white pinstriping and lateral patterning, as well as this graham cracker-like color on the head and part of the feet and everything like that. So if your crested gecko has a lot of contrast when it fires up and sort of this black, brown, and white look to it, that would be considered a tricolor. What's great about tricolors is not only are there plenty of them, but you can find them for pretty reasonable prices too. So more than likely, if you've picked up something from a pet store, it might even be a tricolor. So there's one more gene that I haven't touched on, and that's personally just because I don't have any like it. Dalmatian spots, which surprisingly enough is everywhere in the crested gecko world, and probably all of the geckos that you'll get from a pet store have them. And it's really simple. If they have black dots on them, it's considered a Dalmatian. If you have a gecko that has, you would even say hundreds, that would be considered a super Dalmatian. But at the end of the day, no matter what color, pattern, or anything that your crested gecko has, it's not going to change how healthy it is and its ability to live a long and happy life. I hope this was a helpful video for you guys, even if you're newcomers or even if you're experienced breeders. I hope that you guys found some value in this, and maybe now, whenever you go into a pet store or whenever you get your first crested gecko, you can at least figure out what kind of basic traits it has. That's gonna be it for today's video. Make sure to like, subscribe, all that YouTube mumbo jumbo, and I'll see you in the next video.